Shalom, brethren, and welcome all. This is Cliff, and Cliff, I put in the description that we're going to discuss your objections to Christianity, as well as if we have time to get that far, we're going to discuss Darwinian theory and the insights that that brings to other topics, in addition to biological evolution. And it sounds like you may have some things you'd like to talk with me about. So if you want to introduce yourself and set some context for what you want to talk about, that would be good.
Sure. I'm Cliff, and I guess you could say I hold a naturalist worldview. I'm an atheist, and by atheist here I specifically mean that I don't believe in the existence of a deity. It doesn't mean that I argue against it. I'm agnostic on the position. So in this, it may be useful. Some of the people listening, they should, if they think of atheist as denying the existence of God, then they should just think of me as an agnostic. I think of atheist and agnostic as two different ideas. So, and I'm interested in understanding what causes people to believe the things that they believe. And one of my concerns when it comes to religious beliefs is, it's a sort of a pithy statement, but this idea that a person who could believe any single thing without proof could believe anything at all without proof.
Well, then we would be hung up on the word proof, right? But before
Sure.
we get into full-on discussing, I want to finish letting you introduce yourself and all that.
Yeah, well, that's basically. I'm a PhD student at Michigan State University. I work on evolutionary theory. I use digital evolution, which is basically it's a process by which we can create systems that implement evolutionary processes, and then we can study them. So while I can't speak at length to biological evolution, I can't defend. I'm not well studied on. I know quite a lot about it, but I'm not well studied on biological evolution. I can talk about theories of evolution. I can talk about the evolution of complexity from non-complexity. I can discuss those topics at length.
Okay, well, that would be very interesting. And then I think you were also mentioning evolutionary theory being involved in the formation of religions.
So, I think that, I guess there are two ways you could look at this. One is humans, humans from my worldview evolved certain cognitive capabilities. And the way that our brains work makes us, well, for example, on certain points of fact, it makes us susceptible to say illusions, right? Optical illusions are something that can fool us because of the way that our brains are formed. But it also makes us, the idea of, if you hear a noise, if you're a prehistoric human and you hear a noise in a bush, should you run away, or should you go investigate, or should you ignore it? Well, those individuals who ran away were the ones who didn't get eaten by the tiger hiding in the bush. So there's an evolutionary pressure that says, even though there may not be a tiger in the bush, there usually isn't one, you should probably run away, right? So that there are these evolved behaviors that that at least provide a narrative that explain why our brains sort of developed in a way such that certain religious ideas would be palatable, would like intuitively make sense, and that may not mean that they're true.
Yeah, so then you would have both an intellectual evolution, that the more reasonable one that sounds better in an argument is going to survive. And then you would also have like socio-political, cultural evolution, that the one that it doesn't necessarily have to be the most reasonable, but because of socio-political reasons survives among the people. So you have these two factors of evolution in there.
Yeah, and I'd say, along the socio-political, there's also a social inheritance, right? So there's genetic inheritance. The structures my genetic structures that result in my brain that has certain similarities to your brain that makes us both susceptible to not being able to see, ultraviolet, right? That's like bees can see it, we can't. So that's from the genetics, but then there's this other stuff of this inherited cultural information, which is non-genetic, and that's also evolving in a different way, right? Because that can, in a more Lamarckian way, it can change, and the changed ideas can be inherited. And both of these things are acting at the same time and influencing each other.
Yeah, which is what's interesting is I totally agree about these other forms of evolution, but I don't agree about biological evolution. But I think we gave people a very good sort of preview for um, how interesting and deep that discussion might go once we really get into it. Here, let me turn off my alerts so I don't make interrupting sounds. Okay, then there were some objections in the email. You said, "Oh, I didn't tell the audience the context of us meeting."
Oh, sure.
So Cliff had some objection to my perspective on the Matt Dillahunty debate with Dr. John McClatchy from the review, the 5.5 hour review that I have up of that.
I did not watch all 5.5 hours.
Yeah, that's good. I got to make a shorter one. And it's much more meant for like churchiness and how we would express the spirit to be more effective when doing a more complete apologetic. So I would really only expect Christians to stick around for 5.5 hours of that, and not even most of them. But I do want to make a shorter one. That one, it just ended up being what it was. But yeah, so it's the first time I got a comment quite like that was this one from Cliff as far as on my own videos as a brand representative of a channel. So I didn't respond very well to him, but I gave him my email and he emailed me very graciously, and we decided to have a nice talk and to approach things better. So that was very good. And here we are. Then like there are some objections in your email. I was thinking maybe just we can go through them as quick as you want or get as much into them as you want, but just
Sure.
in order, except skip the one that's going to go into the big topic of all kinds of Darwinian stuff. Or that might not actually be in your points. That might just be in your introduction up here.
Mm-hmm.
So your first, well, these are where you said you think we can get a few things out of the way before we start. And I'm like, get these out of the way. These are the meat.
Well, yeah, I didn't mean so much get them out of the way. I meant here's some positions I can make clear.
Yeah,
in writing.
Set the context and get us off to a good start
Yes.
with better understanding. Yeah, I get that. And then, so there is nothing that you know of that would make you a believer. The problem you have with believing in anything as large as God, and this I think is actually a very poignant concern, is that you could be fooled by something bigger than you but smaller than God. And you use a specific example. I don't know if you want me to.
I mean, it's fine.
You can. I think it might be a little bit more distracting because when I read bigger than you but smaller than God, isn't that kind of naturally the situation that we are in and it cannot be helped? Like, aren't you right now convinced by something bigger than you and smaller than God?
Well, I mean, I specifically mean, I mean, I guess in the example, I referred to to an alien, but I think any sort of person with a sufficiently advanced technology could convince me of, could convince me that they are a greater power, right? A greater power, however you want to define that. And so the concern there is no matter what evidence came to bear, I would be hard pressed to actually find it convincing, because how could I know that that's not right? That's not somebody who's got a widget that can do something I don't understand. Right? Somebody comes and flies. Somebody's flying around. Well, maybe they figured out some technology that allows them to fly. So that convinces me that, hey, you've got some You've got something I don't have, absolutely. But that doesn't convince me that you made the universe, right? It doesn't convince me that you're God.
Which is interesting. My perspective is much more spiritually based. So, it wasn't proven to me by a physical means, and I wouldn't be looking for physical proof personally. But here's sort of my perspective on this something um, greater than us but smaller than God is that whatever someone's holding as an ultimate standard or holding as their standard of truth, then that fills that role of their God, what they hold as most high, what they worship, or so that's sort of what I'm getting at. That we're all in a position of being beholden to something greater than ourselves, and if it's not the highest God, then it is something greater than ourselves, but less than God.
I'm not sure that I agree with that necessarily. So, I mean, this sort of gets at some of the points I made earlier in that email. But the idea that so basically, I hold nothing to be. No, let me say that differently. I I believe, but I do not know that there are true things, that the universe has a state, right? So that um, there either is or is not a glass of water sitting on my desk, um, and and that's a fact. The truth value of whether or not there's a glass of water sitting on my desk is a fact. I think that we lack the ability to ever know with certainty any fact. Our faculties could be mistaken. So our ability to perceive truth is different from the truth. Now, I've talked to some people who believe that there is no truth to be discerned. I have trouble with that. Like, I just have trouble wrapping my head around it. Um, so I accept this. Now, the reason that I accept that there are facts is because of the consistency, because of observed consistency. I can't explain where the consistency of my observed universe comes from. And I say my because it's from my point of view, right? I'm also not going to argue I'm not a, um, I'm also going to not, I'm not going to argue that I'm not a brain in a vat because I don't know that. All right. I think that I think it's a perfectly valid point to bring up. This hard solipsism point it's a perfectly valid point to bring up. Some people have said it's stupid. I think it's stupid to talk about because it doesn't matter. If I am a brain in a vat and I don't know it, my experience is going to be the same as if I was. So I'm just going to dispense with that. I'm not going to prove it. I'm not going to say it's true. It's not true. Anything else. We could be in a simulation. Same thing. But if when it comes to sort of this truth and like my belief that there is truth, it's because of repeated observation. It's because I can observe a thing. I can tell you, oh, I've been to Grand Central Station in New York City, and I've been in this station, and in the middle of the station there's a clock, and if you've been there, you know the clock, and you knew the clock before I mentioned this. So that thing exists. We have shared experience of that thing if you've been there, and so this this concept of the consistency of the universe, while I can't explain where it comes from, it does seem to be there, and so basically I take that as an initial building block, and I accept that it's an unstable building block. It is unproven, but it's pretty good, right? I mean, it's highly consistent.
Yeah, and I definitely support. We do our best with what we have, and we can only do our honest best. So I'm hearing a lot of that from what you're describing. Um, and I don't know if you would like me to read some of that introduction you gave that sort of sets some context.
Sure, you can if
Um,
you think that'll be helpful.
yeah, I'm sure it definitely wouldn't hurt. And then I'll give my response to what you were just saying. So this is a bit of a tangent just to give them context.
Hmm.
Um, my research is understand. Okay, so this is from Cliff's perspective. My research is understanding evolution and the evolution of simple behaviors using different forms of artificial life and digital evolution. Much of what I understand about morals and other behaviors, including where I think religion likely comes from and why it's so prevalent, is based on my direct understanding of evolutionary processes and the underlying systems that allow for evolution, that being variation, differential success, and inheritance. I would say that I have a naturalistic worldview. This worldview is based on the consistency of observations of the world. Oh, that's cool. It's a worldview based on observations of the world.
Eh,
Worldview.
Sure,
That sounds pretty
sure.
fair. Yeah. Okay. I do not know where the consistency comes from, and I do not know that I have a method to understand the source of the consistency. So I think what we might stress there is you do not know. You're not saying you have nothing. It's just that you don't know.
Hmm.
I'm okay with that. Note that I am not insisting on consistency. It could be that the universe is inconsistent, and if and when I find that to be the case, I'll deal with it. In the meantime, I take it as a useful, if unprovable, feature and get on with my science and living my life. I am an agnostic atheist, by which I mean I do not believe in the existence of God. You already talked about this,
Yep.
though you don't accept the burden of proof for a non existence of God.
Right,
And
because I do not. Right, because I
yeah,
don't claim a non-existence.
and I understand both perspectives on the preference of using the word atheist one way or the other. So, yeah, that's neither here nor there. But back to all of your response about doing your best to find the truth and within what you can observe that's repeating and all that. That I all find very fair. I'm not trying to trap you. I would just like to know directly in context of what I'm addressing the idea that everything you think may be something bigger than you but smaller than God. I mean, I don't mind what your response is. I'm not trying to trap you. I would just like a direct response to the idea that everything you just described might be something bigger than you but smaller than God.
I mean, if you say might be, well, I'm still having trouble.
Just conversationally.
Yeah, no, no, I'm just having trouble parsing what you mean by you're saying. Um,
Like
I
the
mean, I'm
standard
always.
reasoning and all that, everything you just described.
Oh, sure, but I guess the thing is that you know, I sort of accept and I think therefore I am
Mhm.
concept, and again, which totally is totally agreeable with hard solipsism. Um, and it also means I cannot prove to you that I exist, right? I can't prove to you that I'm not a philosophical zombie. It's not possible. So it's a convenience for me to assume that you are not a philosophical zombie. So I'll just accept it, uh, right? But I can't prove that. You could be a figment of my imagination. This whole thing could be a figment of my imagination, right? But the fact is that even if it was, uh, okay, I have to descend one level farther. It could be worse than it's just a figment of my imagination. It could be a figment of my imagination, which I'm creating right now, and there's no history, right? So that's like the ultimate hard solipsism is I don't exist in the form that I think I am, and and the past doesn't exist, right? So I'm willing to like accept all of that as I can't disprove it, but the fact of the matter is, it sure seems like there's a history, and it sure seems like I'm living in this world, and I have to deal with the consequences of this world. And it seems like I can sense pleasure and pain, and I would like to avoid pain and have pleasure. And you know, something like engaging in some deep philosophical conversation is pleasurable for me for whatever reason. Um, and so these are observations that I've had, and so uh, I because the observations have been consistent, I put faith in those observations that they're telling me something, and that I can make predictions about future states, what's going to make me happy and what's going to make me sad, and how the world will change if I do certain things. And this has been consistent, right? And as long as it's consistent, I'm going to keep using it. And I don't feel like I need to. Um, I don't need to. Don't feel like I need to build up on anything else. Like this isn't built. Like I wake up in the morning and I see stuff happen, and then I start to go, oh, well, does that happen again if I do the same thing, right? And so like it's built up from the. You, you, I can't say I do believe in the like I said, I do believe in the consistency of the universe. I believe that the sun's going to rise tomorrow. So I can't say that I don't have any presuppositions here. I do, but the presuppositions are based on observed events, consistent observed events. And if at some point it stops being consistent, well, then I have to retabulate all of my views. Does that make sense? So like I don't really feel like it's built up on something else. It's just the result of observation.
Excuse me. Yeah, I totally hear all of that. And then
So I mean, if that doesn't
then,
answer the question, if you could rephrase it.
well, I
Yeah,
don't
I
I
will
don't
try
think
to
you
address
have
it.
to answer the question then. It might just be fair for me to give my perspective at this point,
Sure.
which is sort of that yeah, in what you're doing with doing your best, it is your honest best. This isn't a criticism like that, but I still think it falls into that bigger than yourself, smaller than God category that you're concerned about. That's the way that I see it. And then this is stuff that I think now it might be fair for me to sort of give you some of this good start stuff like you gave me so that you know where I'm
Sure.
coming from more. So I'm going to share something that Outcast American said, um, not as a response, not as my response to what you said, but as sort of expressing my generality of my relationship with different types of atheism, you know? This is why we're supposed to trust God. Um, One reason, anyways, it's God or absurdity. God doesn't want us to be absurd. He loves us. He wants us to know, which is part of why he gave us his revelation. And now, yeah, so for me, you see, the limits of knowledge are not at philosophy, they are at spirit. And I can describe that in a way that makes a little more hands on sense. Um, One thing I'm concerned about with this discussion is that, like, every atheist I talk to is very curious about my epistemology and all that. And then for my audience, it could get to like repeating every time I talk to an atheist the whole thing about my epistemology. But right now, I have two videos about 2 hours each with Matthew Steele, where we discuss those sorts of things a lot. And then the last one I did was with Lucas Medugno, who's just a nice guy who hangs out in the side chats and likes to talk to us. But it was specifically the topic, "Do I know God?" And but at the same time, I can really come at it from a very different angle. So I don't know if we can avoid going into the entirety of my epistemology for the audience. That would be good, but I want to be very fair to you. But this side of it, I can definitely get into what I mean about spirit is the limit instead of philosophy. Spirit is not always this hands on, but I'm going to give a hands on example. So I'm going to do this two pronged. The first prong will be a bit of vocabulary. The word soul means breath. That's in Hebrew and Greek. So for the Bible. And then the word spirit means gust. That's like a current of air. So that's why it's the Holy Ghost. The word ghost and gust were apparently the same at the time. And one thing is that's the difference between me breathing, and this is according to 1 Corinthians 15. I won't get into the details, but we inherit the first Adam, which is breath, which is like, I associate that with self expression. And we have the English word for breath, respiration, which has like the word spirit in it, respiration. Then Jesus inspires us with a gust of it from outside of us. It says the first Adam was made a living soul, a living breath. The second Adam was made a life giving spirit, that is, a life giving gust. And so he inspires us. And then the wind moves things too. And so one of the things that spirit is has a lot to do with motivation. So we must worship God in motivation and in truth. Like our motivations must be truly there with God. We must worship Him in spirit and in truth. And we're given the spirit of truth. And that's basically everything unphysical about truth that we might interact with. The spirit of truth is truth in things, you know? But one of the things that also is the motivation of truth. And that's where I think I'm getting a little more hands on is and that's actually the second prong, so that's the whole thing there. That's where I think I'm trying to describe it a little more hands on is it's oh no, the second thing I'm going to get at is how we can think spiritually. And I think that's usually going to be intuition, intuitive thought. Now, babies, when they're basically incapable of thought and everything looks blurry to them and their brain does not yet recognize their senses, it's an experience of intuition forming, and that's the entire basis of our entire thinking. And yet somehow once we like get a hold of logic and stuff, I'm going to word it this way. The devil tries to guilt us into not trusting our intuition. Now, if we're going to trust our intuition, we should be testing our intuition and getting better at it. So I'm not saying a blind trust of intuition, but a fair one. Intuitive intelligence is a very real thing, and it can access some things that science and philosophy cannot access. And God uses our intuitive awareness to let us know Him. That's why we're warned not to be captured by vain philosophy, and we're warned against some things about philosophy. Philosophy is good, but if we make it our limits, and to some extent we're making it like our God, or we can't find God because we've put philosophy above spiritual awareness. So yeah, that's sort of my overall perspective regarding our discussion, I think.
Okay. So my response to this, I mean, there are a bunch of ways I could respond to this, and I've been trying to, while you were talking, I was trying to think of the most, what would be an effective direction. So my primary concern with what you were saying is these are unsubstantiated claims. Like what you're saying, it feels as though you have a conclusion in mind and you are proposing a hypothesis, but you're proposing it as fact. And so like I think one of the big challenges, like philosophically related to religion and origin of religion, is that we have these unanswered questions. Some of them are what happens when we die. Some of them are, where did the universe come from, right? So what happens when we die? I mean, physically we know what happens when you die, right? Spiritually, if there's a spirit, who knows? But as far as like origin of the universe, it's just like this unknown, right? Is this paradox? Well, it either had to come from somewhere, but if it came from somewhere, then it had to be first, and you can't have an unmoved mover or an uncaused cause, right? So to me, I see religion as like a big part of religion is trying to address some paradoxes. So we have these paradoxes. I got this problem, and like I want an answer to the problem, and so religion provides a hypothesis. It says here's a thing: if God existed, and God is eternal, then that addresses it. Then the universe exists. He makes the universe, and that answers the question. But it assumes an if. There's an if at the beginning. If God exists, then all these things could happen. And my point is, I don't know that he does exist. I don't know that he doesn't exist. I don't know that, right? I don't know. And so my position is to withhold an opinion until such a time as I do, and I'll work on those areas that I can observe, that I can test. Right. So there are the parts of the universe that I can work with, the physical stuff around me, the theories that I have access to, and then there's the stuff I just can't get to. So does that make sense? Sort of I mean, that really is why I'm atheist on this, or agnostic on this point.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's fair. For me, it's not a hypothesis at this point. I came through drastic skepticism that only the truth could overcome. And before that, I was trapped by the devil. And so, I mean, I know most atheists are going to find it impossible to believe that drastic skepticism is what leads to this kind of confidence in Christ. Um, but that was my route here. So it's not so much a process of hypothesizing for me. It's really like daily witness, you know? So it's sort of like how you talk about your, you live as if you're not a brain in a vat, though you could be a brain in a vat kind of a thing. Um, I just take it a bit further to where this daily experience, um, eventually the course of my life led me to a miraculous moment where Christ was obvious. And then every moment of a life tests that, and it always holds up better than everything before that did. And I was reborn about 3.5 years ago when I was 33. So it's more like I'm just very confident. I'm 100% confident that I am not that brain in a vat, but the question isn't the brain in a vat, the question is Christ. But the comparison I'm making is how it's like everything from all of life and all of daily experience informs it. So it's not like an experiment with a hypothesis. It's just a completely different process of coming to truth.
How do you know that you don't have biases?
How do I know I don't have what?
That
Oh,
you
biases.
aren't biased on this? Like if you know this, then how do you know? I mean, we know that we misremember things, right? That like that we can misperceive things. We also know that we recast things. We know that sometimes we do a thing and then we justify what we did after the fact, right?
Yeah.
Internally, like not like as a not like as an act of will, but like it's just unconsciously, you know. You either remember an event that didn't happen a certain way, and so like how do you know that you with I mean, basically you have a presupposition now that um,
I mean, the process does relate to science because over the course of my life, I can observe um, just, I mean, a countless number of observations that would give me a good data set on assessing what level of trustworthiness I can have in my own mind. And then I can use that data set to come to what would be the best scientific conclusion. Now, the difference here is that it's not a data set I can share with others. So, science is usually considered to be like publicly evidenced. So it's similar to science, but it's on a private basis. So it's not based on just assuming because I am me that I'm going to trust myself. That's really what I had to be broken to by God. And I went through a lot of breakings in my life and a lot of ego destruction before I was ready to stop being the same me. Because to gain Christ would have made who I was being stop existing. So that person, to survive, had to reject Christ. But I'm a different person now. So that other person is dead. He was cast into the lake of fire, and I have eternal life, and I have a new birth. So that's what they call being born again. And at the time that it happened, I had no idea about all of this. I wasn't like thinking something like this might happen and waiting for that moment or something. This is all stuff I've learned after the fact. But yeah, I had a very drastic moment of rebirth, and a lot of people they don't have that drastic moment. Um, so our relationship to truth and to God is it's different for different people. But yeah, so the answer to that question, how I would, I can do my best assessment and come to the best conclusion on what I can trust of my memory, my reasoning faculties. And back then, I couldn't trust myself because I would change my thoughts to protect my identity. But Christ broke me of that, and then now I'm in Christ, and the only identity I want is truth. So if truth is gonna like break me into my identity, I mean that is where I'm going now. So it's before it would not have been fair to trust myself because I didn't have that self honesty. Instead, I was beholden to continuing to surviving that Darwinian survival of my identity. But I no longer hold that Darwinian survival to my identity. I just subject myself to Christ. That's why he says, "Whosoever keeps his life will lose it, but whosoever loses his life for my sake will gain it." And seeing such a contrast is like a night and day contrast too. So that also informs my perspective. So as far as presupposition, I'm biased now, but I wasn't biased when I learned it. Just like when they taught me 3 plus 4 equals 7, and they used like 3 apples and 4 bananas in a picture when I was in kindergarten. Actually, I think it was apples and oranges. But 3 plus 4 is 7. Well, I had no bias before that, but I am very biased now that 3 plus 4 is 7. If someone wants to try to argue to me that 3 plus 4 equals 6, I'm not even going to waste the time arguing with them. And so, yeah, skepticism unto learned facts does create a bias, and I am biased now, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, this on one level, the arguments you're putting forth don't move me, and they don't move me because from where I'm sitting, I started to say this before. An analogy that I had come up with for religions is religions are like gloves, right? So think of the metaphor of a human brain as a hand, and as humans we evolve to have hands. They have, or forget the evolved. We have hands, and they have a certain shape. They've got a thumb and 4 fingers generally, and over time, different types of gloves have developed. You've got a fingered white glove, and it makes you look real fancy when you're wearing a suit. You've got a fingered winter glove. It gives you dexterity. If you want to go skiing, this is probably what you want, so you can hold your ski poles. You've got like a mitt that's just like, the whole hand is just one thing together. And if it's really cold out and you don't care, well, then that's the glove you want. And then you've got a glove where it has the fingers cut off, and if you're going to drive, you want like a lot of dexterity, but you don't want to get blisters on your hand. And so here are all these different kinds of gloves. Now, there are gloves that have like extra fingers, and they get in the way, and there are gloves that have like spikes on the inside, and those aren't very comfortable to wear. So the different gloves that have proven to be useful, that have fit the hand, in my mind, they're like different religions that have fit the mind. So our minds work in a certain way. I think it's because of evolutionary processes, and different religions fit the mind. They address different concerns. They fit the mind in different ways, and we're therefore susceptible to being convinced by them. And that explains why there's multiple coexisting religions, and also that these things they're socially constructed. So religions are they spring up somewhere, and then they're passed from that point. But you can trace them from their origin. They don't. I don't know of any cases where the same religion has spawned up in two places. And if there were, that would be very strong evidence that there was some guiding power that was actually like, saying this is the truth, this is the reality. I don't even want to speculate, but that's the point.
I think there's a lot of aspects of religions that, because they're apparent truths, are shared from place to place. Um, but then again, that like you say, that doesn't show a guiding hand. That shows an ability to assess, and to come up with a good assessment. So your hand and glove analogy, I really want to respond to that. I do want to respond to cafe real quick. Um, I don't want to get distracted with this, but how did I have that drastic exposure to rebirth or ego death, and would I classify it as a form of beatific vision or spiritual? Um, First off, I want to say that the focus is on Christ. People have partial or entire ego deaths without Christ. And that's like what Christ talks about if you cast out the one devil and the house is empty and clean, then it'll come back with seven devils and make like a good home. And so, yeah, it's not about ego death, but my process, I did require ego death. I had to be drastically humbled, and we know that God goes to the humble. And so, the key factor is Christ. That's what makes this a permanent, lifelong thing. Um, Beatific, I don't know. It was the moment that the devil's sway over me, the walls that he put up in my mind to make me unreasonably and unfairly doubt myself. Because I definitely have a plenty of self doubt. That's how I operate. It's a necessary component. But yeah, the unfair doubt of the world that was put in me and all those kinds of things, those were suddenly gone, and that was just a whole different way of experiencing life. So I definitely noticed it, and that let me trust Christ, and life has never been the same since. And then yeah, you said vision or spiritual is a form of beatific vision or spiritual revelation. It was definitely spiritual revelation. Yeah. um, these things don't move Cliff because they are not his own ego death and spiritual birth experience. Yeah, and I did not intend to move you, Cliff. I
Well,
was
I
expressing
guess I
my
would say
perspective. Well,
in
I don't
terms.
mind your choice of words. I'm sort of kind of defending you from Cafe here, but
Sure,
it
sure, sure.
wasn't even, and defending myself because it's like this wasn't really about moving you. I was
No,
more
and I mean, I
defending
guess I don't mean like move, like emotionally moved. I mean in terms of
finding it compelling.
I'm doing like you're making an argument, and I'm just not finding the argument convincing.
Mhm. Yeah, and I wasn't making an argument, but that's fine because we're having a discussion about it. So yeah, a few people they jumped a little too much on your choice of words there, and I choose my words really carefully, so they might be like it might be natural for people listening to me to like get nitpicky with words because that's how I talk. But yeah, Cliff didn't mean specifically that we're arguing. He was just having a discussion as if we were arguing. That's how I took it.
Sorry, I'm a scientist. Everything is an argument. I put forth my hypothesis is an argument that the world is a certain way, and so I don't mean like we're fighting about it. I just mean it's putting forth a point of view that I think is right, and then asking you to challenge that point of view.
Okay, and then I think this is a good time to read the point number 2 that you made before I address the hand and glove analogy.
Sure.
Um, and then this actually opens up a bit of a new topic that's right on topic. So we'll have to wait a moment, and that's the harmfulness of religion. So Cliff wrote, well, I'll just say third person here. You believe that religion is harmful, but only that if a person can believe any one thing on faith alone, they can believe anything at all on faith alone. I think a world where people use their best judgment at all times is more likely to experience better outcomes. And I've already spoken about self doubt and skepticism, so we see some agreement here. And
Yeah,
yeah,
the word choice of best judgment there, um, I'm not happy with. So I would rather than say best judgment, I would say you know data from
see,
observation or something. I'd have to think about
I use
exactly how
the
to
word
phrase it.
assessment a lot. What do you think?
Sure.
Like
Well,
if
yeah, I
people
just
use their best assessment at all times, they're more likely
yeah
to
that
experience
may be
better
the word best is a bit problematic there because it's a judgment.
outcomes.
It's judgment, and this statement shouldn't have judgment in it.
Yeah, well, let's not worry too much about that. I'm just kind of telling the audience not to get too hung
Right.
up on single
Right.
words.
Yeah. Hopefully they'll
Because
forgive
like,
me.
yeah, yeah, because I hear what you're saying. I mean, we should just use our best judgment instead of just having some kind of dogmatic potential deceiver in front of us. Maybe, I mean, that's my way of paraphrasing it.
Yeah,
I'm not.
I would agree with that.
And then, so as I talk about the hand and glove analogy, that will address this some too, because I very much agree. Every religion, besides being a student of the Messiah, a student of the Christ, every other form of religion, including forms of Christianity, they all completely fit your hand and glove thing. And it's Christ, the person, who's so special. And so I totally agree with everything you were saying about the hand and the glove. And the difference is that when this glove of Christ comes down, he destroys the hand. He casts the hand that doesn't fit into destruction, and he gives birth to a new hand that will fit into his glove. And at first, it's like a small hand and it grows into the glove. So if I was to take up the analogy, I'd agree in every way except that Christ is special and um, I'll say miraculous because he's divine. I was going to say magical, but no, miraculous and divine. And so, yeah, and as far as religion being harmful and dangerous, I agree with all that too.
So I mean, um, from a creative standpoint, totally interesting where you took that analogy, because it's, I mean, that's an extension of the analogy in a direction that's not, that's not the point of the analogy. The point of the
Well,
analogy is
just
that
to
there's
communicate, not to destroy your analogy, but to use it
no,
to
no, no, no.
communicate
Yeah, yeah,
effectively.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But I mean, I guess that I am sort of interested in your response, though. That I mean, the I mean, I guess are you insinuating that all religions are essentially the same religion?
No. Um,
Okay. So I
because
mean,
they're all different gloves in that sense. But what I'm saying is that I agree with you that they are gloves shaped for hands. You know, it's like people are what you were saying about people's minds being comfortable with certain religions and all that. I do
okay,
agree with
okay.
all that.
So you're just saying that the Christian glove is special somehow out of the
Yeah, you know
among the other ones.
the legit Christian glove, and that's
Sure.
why it's such a high price to follow him, and we have to take up our cross. You know, we have to die with him. And this stuff's written in scripture. So all this stuff I keep like throwing out, it's not like my personal stuff. It's coming right from scripture. Just so you know. So
Right.
since we have to die with him, that's like where I say, you know, that hand that doesn't fit his glove has to die and he'll make us new. And
Sure. I mean, I again that I guess the issue here is that um, sort of until we're dead, we don't know whether or not this is right.
yeah, unless our intuitive knowledge that we use for so many things.
I don't trust my intuition.
Yeah, but like for instance, when you see that is intuitive, you're not using logic to tell yourself what you're seeing, and you may be aware that your sight can fail, but because you've tested your sight your whole life and it has succeeded, you have very strong, even a scientific kind of reason to trust that intuition. And so, and all of our mind was formed as intuition when we were babies. That's the foundation of everything else. If you trust your philosophy, if you trust your logic, you first have to trust your intuition.
Well, now you're getting into consciousness.
Yeah, but it's also the foundational way the mind builds itself.
But do you think that a human mind is special somehow among other animals?
Um,
Other than the fact that it obviously has certain capabilities that other animals don't have, but intuitively, is there something different about it?
the human mind, I think, is very special. I don't think the human brain is that special. And I think we are at the point that we should maybe start addressing the brain because what the brain is and how it works is part of where we get truth from. or how God physically embodies our truth into this world. Because the brain is a harmonic device and truth is harmonious.
The brain is a harmonic device. What do you mean that? Are you asserting it's harmonic with some um, extra natural force, or what do you mean? In what way do you mean it's harmonic? Because that
Okay,
seems like,
yeah, let me
like an
explain
assertion.
that some. So it doesn't run programs like a computer does. And I mean, within the totality of what it's doing, there may be some details that are bits of program, but overall, it's not running a program. It's like this 3D thing happening. And there's a lot of, I'm sure there's a lot of frequencies involved, a lot of, these electrical impulses and such. There's frequencies involved, there's location and networking involved, and then there's the intensity of the electrical signals would be involved, and the timing is all involved, which goes with the frequencies. But
Yes.
so all of that, it's like a music. The mind has like this musical way of working. So I describe it as a harmonic device. The way all that harmonizes together is key to the mind continuing to be the mind. So the brain is, yeah, a harmonic device.
So this goes right to one of the angles of my research. So one of the things that I work on, I refer to them as digital substrates. You can think of them as cognitive architectures. Um, what we do basically is uh, I I have different ways that I can have a self modifying computer program, and there are lots of different methods that I can use to do this. And one of the things I'm very interested in is comparing these different cognitive architectures with each other for what they can do, what they can't do, and comparing that to biological constructs as well. So it's comparing that to actual behavior of neurons and how neurons work. Um, it, it it seems to me that the brain very much is running a program. Um, the reason I brought up my work is because so we have certain one of the types of brains that can evolve. This thing is called an Avidian. It's basically a list of computer instructions. It's a very specifically tailored computer language in that any series of instructions, any order of instructions can be run, can be executed. There are no syntactical errors provided from a certain order, and this makes it very evolvable. Because if you put the things in the wrong order and it crashed, it would be very hard because it would. Now, most when you start out a run, you generally start with a randomized brain, and it doesn't do anything. But then mutations will come in, and the brain will start doing things. And the task may be, we may have it try to solve a mathematical problem. We may ask it to drive a robot and collect, like harvest a field. So you say, oh, there's some resources. It's all simulated in the computer. But we say there's a patch of resources, and we're going to give you a limited amount of time. You should figure out a way to navigate over this patch of resources to collect as much as you can. And so over time, the mutations will accumulate, and the structure of the program will change in such a way that it gets good at collecting these resources. And now, so Avidians, right, they're a list of computer code. There's this other thing called a Markov brain. A Markov brain is a set of logical gates. They take inputs, they do some sort of internal process. It's usually a lookup table. And all these gates are run in parallel. So on each update, you basically feed the sensors of the agent, it runs these things, and then it spits out an answer. We've got another kind of brain that I work with that's called a soft-wired neuron brain. And a soft-wired neuron brain, it's sort of relative to an artificial neural network. What this thing has is a rather complex model for a neuron. So each neuron has a series of dendrites. Data flows in through the dendrites. It goes through some logical operators. Then it flows into the soma. It goes through another logical operator. And then these neurons are connected to each other. And there's a pseudo-developmental process where the neurons are placed, and based on tags, they wire up in different ways. The point of this is to say that the Avidian is very, very far from what we think of as a biological brain. And the Markov brain with nodes is more like it, because the nodes are sort of like neurons. And this neuron brain is very much like it. It works literally by these neurons having to spike So they accumulate charge just like a regular neuron, and then they spike. And they don't have the concept of an internal memory. The memory is just persistent patterns within the brain, and these things evolve
Oh,
to
wait, just one moment. Did you say that's a software
soft wired
neuron?
neuron brains. It's a
So,
you
so,
won't
so
find
then
any.
it so then it runs through a linear program, but the software simulates neurons. Am I understanding that
Yeah,
right?
so
Okay.
basically I have a concept of a neuron. It's a coded unit, and the neurons are all executed effectively in parallel. So all the neurons are updated, and then all of their outputs are updated, so that um, basically I can update the whole brain one tick. But any internal memory in this brain is simply in the spike pattern. It's all these neurons, they accumulate charge and they either fire or they don't fire. So there's no concept of code in this brain. There's no concept of like memory being held somewhere. It's all just
Yeah,
ephemeral.
this is why I say it's so different from computers. And I know I was saying it's not program. So what you're discussing is very interesting because it's almost like you're discussing program to the point that it's using large amounts of software to simulate a different hardware, but ultimately it's still this linear program that a computer always runs a linear program, or maybe it has a way of multitasking multiple linear programs and then
I
having
mean,
them
in
give input
essence,
to each other. But ultimately, it runs one linear program, right? A computer, it has to do it so fast that the multiple programs are somehow run as one program.
well, I mean, technically, we can actually run them in parallel. So I don't do this work. All of my parallel is simulated, but there are people who are actually working on arbitrarily scalable systems where each component of the system is a unique piece of hardware, and they're all running at their own speed and they're all communicating with each other. And this then does really create a system where you've got a set of neurons that are able to communicate with each other, where each neuron is operating at its own
Okay,
speed.
if I may, is that in e- some sense almost equivalent to just a network of computers?
Well, sure, but a neuron is not unlike a
Oh, okay. You're talking about neurons. So yeah, now you're talking about how they're trying to develop new hardware based on the brain.
sure,
So
but the thing is, if you look at neurons either fire or they don't fire. Generally speaking, there's an exception for every rule in biology. There's an exception. There are direct electrical connections. There are different kinds of chemical connections. But generally speaking, neurons either fire or they don't fire. And so you can you can abstract what's happening inside the neuron from what's happening between the neurons. And so uh, the system that I'm describing with these soft-wired neuron brains, they're soft-wired because the way that they can evolve, the wires between neurons can move slowly, basically, um, instead of having to take big steps that are difficult for evolution. Um, but but the point is that this model basically, um, yes, it is simulating the hardware of biology, but the point I'm trying to make is by pointing out these three different kinds of substrates, the Ovidians, the Markov brains, and these neuron brains, is and then biology, right, is the next step, right, on this step of four types of ways to build a brain. They're just different architectures that take inputs, process them, and generate outputs. And there's no I have no reason to believe that they are intrinsically different.
okay, so what about in the case of either a natural one or well, let's go with the natural for now, even though natural is not exactly my hypothesis. But yeah, so in the case of a naturally formed system like a baby whose experiences keep forming what the connections of the neurons are, and then why does it go in a direction of making sense instead of a direction of nonsense? And to me, that's because the nature of it is that the everything's happening through a harmonic device that's naturally going to tend to bring everything into a harmony. And that's why I say the brain is a harmonic device.
I mean, that is an interest. I mean, that is that is an interesting hypothesis, and it's a useful. You're basing this on a very insightful observation. So there's a system, and I can talk about it only superficially, called hierarchical temporal memory, and this is a system by I think it's Jeff Hawke or Jeff Hawking, something like that. That he's been working on with it's like he has a company called Numenta, and they work on this thing. And what they did is they did a bunch of neurobiology and looked at the way that neurons work and the way that neurons wire, and they constructed a system so that when you feed inputs into it, the system will detect correlations between inputs. So it'll detect if certain inputs are occurring simultaneously, and sort of learn the data, and also if the data changes over time, the way that the neurons communicate with each other, the way that they're connected, and the way that it makes predictions will also change over time. So this thing can like learn patterns, and then what we think likely happens is, I can start at the very beginning of evolution, but I'll just start in the middle. Right, is you've got some sort of cell that has the ability for some kind of input, light sensitivity, or can sense sucrose or something in the environment. And those cells that respond positively to this thing, they survive better, right? Just pure natural evolution. When it comes to like brains, those individuals whose brains developed such that they could detect patterns and then use those patterns to make future predictions, which increase the likelihood to produce offspring, are the ones who survived. And so, it's all, mutations are all by chance, right? So the arrival of a mutation has to be by chance. But if the mutation occurs and it's beneficial, natural selection will select for it.
Yeah, and with what you're referring to there, with how much I know about genetics and specification that's required in order to bring a brain to such a specific place, 4 billion years is nowhere near enough to start talking about that kind of theory, in my opinion, or in my best assessment.
But we've got the whole universe. Not just Earth. We've got every single puddle of every single planet.
So then, is panspermia help against abiogenesis in the sense that it improves your time frame that you might have? Is that maybe what I'm gathering?
Well, it's not just the time frame. It's
you mean statistically we're part of the universe, so our statistical possibility is related to the entire universe, not one planet. Yeah. Okay, fair enough. Yes, I follow that argument perfectly.
Right. So it's highly unlikely that it happened, but it seems that it happened, and it seems unlikely. We have no detection of any life outside of our planet. So, right, we don't know how unlikely it is.
Mm-hmm. And then,
consciousness.
Okay, here is Cafe. Yeah, the brain is a harmonic device in that it is the junction box of consciousness. Atheists have often the misconception that the brain is the generator of consciousness. And if I may give 2 cents on that real quick, Cliff, my understanding of this, not to speak for Cafe, but my understanding of this, the junction box of consciousness has a lot to do with what I'm saying about how the brain is structured to intuitively go towards truthfulness. So that's where it junction boxes our awareness of reality. So it's not that consciousness generates from the brain, but the brain is a place where consciousness.
Sure. This argument, quote unquote, I don't find moving, essentially because, I mean, it's an hour and 4 minutes, so I don't know how much longer you want to go. This is going into.
I wanted to ask you about that. How much time are you up for? Because right now the audience has stayed the same or grown some, so there's no indication that we've gone too long.
We could talk for a few more minutes, but we're on like the precipice of a very big topic. So
So
um,
rather than open the topic, you're thinking we should like
no,
be
we
close
could
the
go on.
discussion and
Yeah,
open it another day?
I just wanted to make sure that we had enough time to address it, or we could we could get into it, but then we may have to recap if we met another time. Because I can talk to somebody asked also about the hard problem of consciousness and the questions, and I can address where I fall on that issue. I don't actually think there is a hard problem. I'm very much in the Dennett camp on the hard problem.
Yeah, and I don't want to get too distracted with their questions. We're a debate community, and they want to jump on where they have the best arguments. But I would much rather start getting like really connected with getting to know each other and
Sure,
understanding each
sure.
other's
I mean,
thoughts.
I guess
That's a better place to start trying to share a better
right,
worldview from.
right.
So
As far as
they're getting ahead of what my plan is.
that's fine, that's fine. As far as this idea of the junction box, though, um, essentially what that is
Oh, wait,
arguing,
real quick before the junction box.
yeah,
So would you have not saying we should plan for another hour, but if it happens to go another hour, do you have that? I mean, what time frame do you have?
yeah, that's fine. I'll just do some work later. I'll have to catch up on
Okay.
some things. I've
Well, I
got a
mean,
bug and a piece of
no,
stuff.
if you have things you should do, then
No, 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 no. I'm
maybe we
working
should
from.
talk about this junction box. And if it opens up a bit, we'll finish it off, but we'll try not to open another topic.
That's yeah. I think that would be great. That would be good. But I will open another topic, so maybe that's when we'll cut it. But so I think essentially what you're arguing with the junction box is a form of dualism, right? You're assuming, you're asserting. I don't want to say assuming. You're asserting dualism. You're asserting that there is something that does the cognition that is external the physical body, and I don't see the need for it. We have a very complex brain. The brain is capable of very complicated operations, and I don't see why that cannot include the ability to do future prediction, which is really what you need, right? That's what you need in a brain, is the ability to do future prediction. You have to be able to do internal simulation. You have to be able to do future prediction. So I think that if I give like the 2-minute summary of how you get to intelligence, by sheer chance you get a self-replicating molecule. There are a couple of ways that people hypothesize how this could happen. It is not my area of study, so I'm not going to defend them. But I have talked directly with people who work on this, and I think they're doing good work, and I feel confident enough that this could happen. That I mean, again, let me aside for a second. I'm always going to take a naturalist position over a supernatural position, because I can see nature, right? So my assumption is nature does exist, and that I have no knowledge about the existence of supernatural. So I'm not going to purport it as part of a solution, right? That's the position I take. Maybe a right position, maybe a wrong position, but that's the position I take. Is what I'm stuck with. So if assuming that I'm taking some so from that standpoint, I have reason to trust people I've talked to who are researching the origin of DNA and the origin of self-replicating molecules. But in my opinion, we don't need self-replicating. We don't need DNA. We don't need RNA. We just need a self-replicating molecule. If we get a self-replicating molecule, then if during replication of that molecule a mutation occurs that makes it replicate faster, then that will take over, right? And you can talk about the conditions under which this developed, and I've read books about it, and I honestly don't remember enough to talk about it, with any knowledge. It's not my area of expertise. But assuming that we can get a self-replicating molecule, getting a cell wall to form around it, that's actually kind of known. There's a lot of work on how cell walls could form and form the first cells. There's a lot of work also on conditions that could lead to RNA arising. Again, this isn't all settled. It's not resolved, but there's good reason to believe that there's stuff here that's reasonable, at least as reasonable as a supernatural explanation, right? That's the thing for me, is that they may even be quite unreasonable. They just have to be reasonable next to a supernatural explanation.
Yeah, and I mean, in our particular community here, we're very focused on abiogenesis, and we definitely
Sure,
strongly
sure.
disagree
So
with reasons. But of course, that whole discussion is stuff that we've done elsewhere in other videos with other people. So I don't
right, and
really
I don't
want
even
to
want to. I
have
don't
you
want to
rehash
go to
it.
abiogenesis. What I want to say is that once you have uh, a cell that simply has an internal, it basically, there's some sort of, the cell wall basically allows certain chemicals in, and it maintains a certain level of chemicals within the cell. And if there were certain chemicals in the environment that would let the cell grow better, if somehow that cell changed such that it would move in the direction of higher gradient, then that cell would replicate faster.
Okay, so it starts in one microenvironment, and then the ones that survive better, they take over the microenvironment. So whatever's in the microenvironment is going to keep, quote, improving, being pretty generalized,
Yeah,
until it can
by
break out of the
mutation.
microenvironment and become multicellular. And then yeah, and we
But
just talked about
but
that
the
much, and like me knowing so much about the microbiology involved in that, it's just way too much to be.
right. But here's the thing: we're not talking about that. We're talking about, because I can't talk to that because that's not my field.
Yeah, yeah.
What we're talking about is cognition. So
But it is a
if
necessary factor, like, you know,
it is. But again,
in reality, maybe not in our discussion, but in reality, it's a necessary factor. It is.
when we talk about the likelihood of something like this developing, we're talking about probabilities. And the fact that we can even assess the probabilities, the fact that it is possible, means that it is not impossible. When we talk about the supernatural, we have no way to know whether or not it's right. It's the supernatural is a proposition to the problem of these probabilities, with the assumption that we actually understand the probabilities. It may be that we
Yeah,
don't understand something about chemistry, and it's far more likely.
but if that's an impractical use of the word possible, then I mean, should I be
But
expected to take it up in when I'm discussing reality, as opposed to if I'm just discussing a fun hypothetical? Like if it's completely impractically, if it's
but I
practically completely impossible, do I like, am I such a slave to the philosophy that I have to say technically it is possible, or can I like be more
you
of
have
a
to
down
say
to earth practical person?
you unfortunately have to say technically it is possible. The thing is, though, that keep in mind that, I mean, I agree, it's crazy, but you still have to say technically it's possible, right?
Yeah,
It's like,
this is sort of one of the memes we go on where like there's the part in the Dumb and Dumber movie where Jim Carrey's like, you know, if he has any chance with that beautiful woman, and she's like, she tells him like essentially none, and he's like, how much? And she says one in a million, and he is just stoked that there's some chance. So
right.
that is one of our memes.
No, I don't. I'm not gonna say that an incredibly improbable thing is likely, but I work in the field of evolution. Incredibly improbable is we run thousands of replicates of experiments, each replicate having hundreds of organisms living for hundreds of thousands of generations in digital space. And in some of the experiments, the results happen all the time, but in some of them, you'll get 5. Out of all of that, you get 5 organisms that actually did something. But that's sufficient, right? These odds
Yeah.
are, so the thing is that the conditions of early Earth may have been different. I mean, heck, for all I know, life evolved somewhere else, and the planet was seeded. I don't know, right? I can't argue that didn't happen. But I guess my point is still that there's, yes, I'm sorry. I should just turn off the comments because I keep seeing them. I'm just going to turn them off so I don't see them.
Yeah, they're not on the same page as I am.
I just went over to the private chat, so I don't have to see them because they're distracting me. I was like, yes, I do have a chance. I agree. It's totally absurd. I'm not. The one thing I did to mentally prepare myself for this was I said, look, I'm going to try to be very careful to not commit to any position that I do not feel I can 100% defend. So that's what I'm doing. And if some of that sounds absurd, it's because I As much as I can't say I think it's likely that an incredibly unlikely thing happened, I also can't say that I think it's impossible. So anyway, that's a tangent. So you've got this cell, and the cell has, by some evolutionary process, changed so that it swims to the food source. It's got little, it's got pseudopods or cilia or whatever it is, but somehow it can navigate to a food source, which means that that cell is taking in some information from the world, and it's altering its behavior based on it. And now this is not a neuron yet. I mean, it's actually very funny. What is a neuron and what is not a neuron is actually not well defined. So I could actually argue that since this cell takes input and has an output response, it's a neuron. But I think that's kind of a loose definition for a neuron. The thing is, at some point, we get multicellular organisms. And I don't want to talk about that. But we have these cells, and the cells have the ability to detect the state outside and then project some information outside the cell. And so cells can start communicating with each other. And this communication over time develops to more and more complex things. Now, one of the things we know, for example, is there's this thing called the place neuron. And they've looked at these in rats, and I believe also spiders, but I know in rats. And what they've detected is that they're neurons, and they're actually laid out in sort of a grid, a repeated pattern. And certain neurons within the collection of place neurons will light up when the rat is at certain locations. And so this structure, which is, and we can see sort of an evolutionary history leading up to this structure. This thing allows for construction of a model, a spatial model within the brain that allows the rat to know how to solve a maze. This is that basically they see that the neurons firing in the rat brain predicts the path that the rat will take through the path, and then when the rat actually takes them, the same neurons fire again so it's like it's simulating in its brain walking through the path. So what I'm saying is I see a pathway from basic I/O on a cell, input output on a cell, to cells that communicate, to cells that grow in repeated patterns, right? You can think also of like the retina of the eye having a very specific pattern, and then that allows us to have high resolution vision, up to more complex structures that allow us to do full internal simulation. And I don't have a problem seeing how, I don't know what all the steps are in this, but I don't have a problem seeing how this is possible.
Yeah, very good. And I look forward. Well, let me ask you: are we going to have another talk?
Oh, we can if you'd like. I mean, if you don't,
I sure would.
If this isn't too in, if I don't feel, I'm trying not to like hedge or avoid questions. I hope it doesn't seem that way.
No, honestly, like, I mean, I just want to have honest discussion. I'm not here to like put you on the spot and make you the one who has to defend things. So, I mean, everything that's in your list, aside from your Jewish upbringing that you mentioned, is everything else in your list is coming up in these topics except the not believing in objective morals.
Right.
So I would like to address that not today, but at some point, because that's a very important topic. And everything else is already being discussed and will be discussed more if we, we didn't really get into the evolution side of things much today, and I tried to keep it that way because that's such a deep, fascinating topic. Or maybe we did get into them.
We touched on it here and there. I don't think we explicitly went into it.
Yeah, and you were just now, and that's something that I want to just like point out to my audience is like, there's a lot of really fascinating insight here. You're doing real things with software that really do inform you about information systems and give you insights into the mind. And while I think that in our community, we have plenty that we can prove to you reality is how we think it is and not the way you think it is. I mean, that's not really the whole point. You're saying a lot of really fascinating, really fair insights here so that they can have insights as to why people disagree with us. And I don't know what of these comments are exactly about you, or maybe I'm seeing things out of context. But
Well, I just saw this one from Smoky Saint, and I totally agree. I do not have an explanation for. I just want to be really clear. Like, I do not want to be strawman here. I do not have an answer for abiogenesis. I know people who are right now working on trying to understand single cell to multi cell transition. This is like a huge question. There's a whole community of it's called artificial life, which is different ways to simulate this, and this can be everything from computational models to constructed biological models. But this is a huge question uh, in the among the people I work with is how can this happen? For me, I'm not necessarily saying I have an answer. What I'm saying is I'm uncomfortable turning to a supernatural answer. So I just stick with I don't know. It happened. We know it happened because we have the results. But
yeah, and
how it happened,
then
I don't know.
well, philosophically, supernaturalism is likely, I would say, and that's sort of where your approach is misled on that front. That you have a presupposition, which just means relative to our argument, you're not defending it yet or anything, but you're presupposing naturalism is more likely. So I
Yes,
would presuppose that supernaturalism is more likely, or I would even argue it if we wanted to take that time.
sure, sure.
Specifically,
I
I
would
mean,
like
I
to
don't.
hear. I'd like to hear an argument for why you think it is more likely.
Yeah, so for us to get that far, that would probably require at least a third talk, which I'd be glad
Sure.
to do. And we can always take our time. This can be over the course of months or whatever. Now, I don't want to like rub in your face that people said this, but I'm not going to put it on screen, but I see the word beta up here a couple times. Like personally, I don't even talk like that. That's like
I don't
pride,
know what it
ego,
means.
beta as opposed to alpha and beta. So it's like it's a type of insult. Yeah, you don't need. I mean, it is just like I don't even talk like that. That's like ego kind of pride stuff, and that's not
Sure.
really what I'm about. Well, I'm talking to my audience because that's because they're a Christian audience, and like that's the ego pride stuff. It's not what I'm about, and I'm not hard on people for using those words sometimes and all that. But I had a guest here, and I'm not saying these were even said about Cliff. These might be I don't know what the comments are about, but if they were, I mean, he came here as a guest to share his insight, expertise, and to discuss his disagreements. And yeah, then there's the word up again. Is that about Cliff?
I don't know. It's all
Now
good.
he's making a point that
Oh, okay. It's fine. It's
tongue
fine.
in cheek. Yeah, I
It's
mean, I would just rather personally on my channel, I'm not looking to like have my guests talk that way from my Christian brothers in chat, because you guys aren't just audience, you're my family. And so it's sort of like my family mistreating a friend. That's all I'm getting at.
yeah.
So,
Yeah. I don't take anything personally here. I
oh yeah, well,
feel
this
that.
is this is between me and my brothers. It's
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
you're
Okay.
in the
Go
middle of it,
get
but
them.
it's
Go
not
get them.
it's not about you. You're good. You're good.
No, but I think it's important if we're going to have open dialogue that, that we're civil. Um, that, I will tell you, I fully disagree with your position. It's, but that's fine. It's, I think, and there have been some questions about Dillahunty's view on various things, and I align a lot with him on, I don't think my position was informed by him. I think I enjoy listening to him debate because I align. He says the things that I would generally say.
Yeah, I
Um,
have a lot of people that I listen to because they actually follow Christ the way I would. So I know what that's like because people might want to accuse me of like, you're just following these teachers or something because you agree with them. It's like, it's kind of the reverse. I agreed with them first, then followed them.
yeah, 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 and I mean, sometimes I'd say there are definitely certain. Um, uh, what's I don't want to say turn of phrase because it's too trite. There are certain ways to describe a concept. I think that, like, when we get into discussing morals, the concept of subjective morals based on some agreed sense of some desired outcome. I think that's a fine way to come to morals, and I absolutely got that from listening to Dohanty and other people like that. But it aligned with the ideas that I had about society and how morals form. So it was a more concise way to make the argument. But we'll talk about that at another time
when we get on the topic of morality. Yeah, and before we get totally into just wrapping it up and ending it, I did want to address consciousness being immaterial.
Sure.
Because for that, I would say we go back to I think, therefore I am. If consciousness was only material, then how would that proof even work? Because even if you're a brain in a vat and the material is completely different than we think, you still think, therefore you are. Like the only thing, when we say I think, therefore I am, the thing we know exists is not a physical thing. Consciousness is not physical.
Well, I mean, if I go down if I want to go down the rabbit hole, I said his name before and I totally spaced on it now. Daniel Dennett. Consciousness doesn't exist. It's an illusion that we construct. So basically, I didn't go into the detail of it, but what I think happens with intelligence is over time, right? We evolve to have these place neurons and other structures like that, which allow us to run simulations. And then at a certain point, we evolve the ability to create simulations on the fly. And within those simulations, we have a self. And so we now can see ourselves as a thing and refer to ourselves as an I. But it's really just neurons firing. It's all just really neurons firing, responding to inputs and body state and, prior experience.
Well, that's all kind of fair enough. But I do ask you then, how do you apply I think, therefore I am?
I think, therefore I am is a logical response. An illusion like free will. Yeah, let's not even go there. It falls out of logic, right? So like I was saying from the beginning, I have observations of the world and those observations are consistent. And so I make future predictions based on those observations and then testing what happens. So I think therefore I am is an observation, right? It's a thing that falls out of these observations is somebody says, prove that I exist. And so okay, fine, I'll prove you exist. And you go punch them and you go, yeah, but I could be imagining you punching me. And it's okay, fine. I can't actually prove anything, but to myself, of course, I can't prove to you that to myself, I think, therefore I am. I can only prove it to me because I have an internal monologue, because I have this built-up cognitive architecture that has a concept of a model that has me in the model. And I don't know how else to put it. I mean, if that seems like I just
feel like we're in that non-physical place. Like even what Daniel Dennett says, consciousness is an illusion. Well, illusions are not physically real. I mean, that's kind of exactly what he's getting at in some sense. And so,
I think what he's trying to say is
real.
not.
That's the I think, therefore I am. It's the only thing we know is real. So the only thing we know is real is an illusion. I can't quite connect those two very well.
Sure, but I don't think that he means specifically that consciousness is an illusion. I think that he means that the fact that consciousness is more than simply stuff happening in our brain is an illusion. We perceive it as being bigger.
Okay, but who observes the illusion?
We do.
Okay, so what is this we? This we is not physical.
No, the we is physical. It's my brain and its current state.
But the experience of witnessing is not a physical thing.
The experience of witnessing what?
Well, like I'm looking at you right now on my TV screen.
Photons are entering your eyes, which are creating electrical signals, which are going into your brain.
You understand all the physical characteristics, but ultimately there is the experience, and it is not the physical characteristics. And I mean, I feel like that's from different angles. I'm still kind of at the same place, so I'm trying to be a little bit holistic. I'm not trying to be unfair, but kind of cohesive with this.
Right. There's a concept called representation that in the digital models that we work with, we measure. And representation is a question. We say, what information does a brain have What are these digital brains? But you can measure R in humans too. I don't know the process. I know people work on it. But you say, what information does this brain have about the environment, which is not currently in the sensors of the organism? So this is like if it's raining outside and you go inside and you shut the door and then you're going to leave in 15 minutes, you can't see outside. Should you take the umbrella with you? If you realize that it's probably still raining, then you have R about the state of the weather. You have representation about the state of the weather. And very, very rudimentary brains can have R. And so all you need to do is, I mean, you acknowledge that I'm an organism and I persist in this world, and that by taking certain actions, I increase the likelihood that I reproduce. I mean, that's the ultimate thing here. That's what powers evolution. So certain actions taken by this agent, initially, the agent is not self-aware. It just responds to stimuli, and that response increases offspring. Over time, it develops more complex models so that it can do farther future prediction. And at some point, those models include itself. It says, how would I be affected if I take a certain action?
Yeah, though the whole thing is there's the awareness of all this, the witness and experience of it all.
It's all in the code. It's just very complicated code.
Well,
And I don't even know how to write it.
that side of it, I have a lot of agreement on, and I appreciate your insight on a lot. But the side of it, as far as witnessing it, I mean, I mean,
But the ability to
let me put it this way: are you saying that we are our pineal gland?
I'm saying you're your whole body. You're, in fact, I mean, it depends what you mean by you. So, I mean, the thing is, the state of my stomach, if I'm hungry, that alters the way that I think. So I can't just say I'm the brain. I can't say I'm just the pineal gland. I can't just say I'm the hypothalamus. I can't just say I'm the brain. In a way, I can't even say I'm just the me, because if I take a piece of paper and I start writing things, it doesn't matter. It's just data. And I start writing things down on the paper, I've extended my memory onto the paper. And so now the state of the paper is affecting my cognition, because I look at the paper and as I collect my data and I see trends, the paper is affecting my cognition. So, I don't want to say it's like, here is where the thought is in the brain, but it sure seems to me, and again, I can't prove it, but it sure seems to me that the brain is capable of logic, and that logic would be capable of constructing a model that includes the self. And if it can do that, I think therefore I am is not a problem.
And the way I see it is that even if all the naturalism is true and everything, what we still see is that a non-physical awareness entity arises from the brain and the body and all that.
In what way
So
do you mean non-physical?
I just mean like no one's going to be able to point to my awareness, if I'm to put it kind of simply. Yeah, my awareness just is not a physical thing. No matter how much it's interconnected with physical things, none of those physical things, nor the totality of them, are my awareness.
That is an assertion. That's an assertion without proof.
Yeah, but it's
I'm
a
not
better.
saying
We have a dichotomy, I think, and it's the better assertion of the two from the dichotomy. I mean, if we have to choose which side of the dichotomy we think is more likely, it's the better side.
And if I was willing to accept supernatural, I would
Not
probably
only that, but this whole I think, therefore I am. The thing that is proven is not a physical thing. So if that with that
well, I
proof
mean,
being such a
concepts.
strong basis, and the thing that's proven is not a physical thing, and that's our
You're,
strong basis is not a physical thing. So I mean, I'm not trying to argue it further.
no, but I mean,
I'm just expressing that honestly, when we on my side of a debate like this get to this point,
right.
this is where we think we've won the debate, and we just don't really know how to get it through to you.
No, I understand. You're on this philosophical point, right? And I don't enjoy this, because I feel like this really comes down to semantics, right? Are numbers physical things? No, but they exist. Yes, but, and I hate these. I hate watching these debates. I find them very frustrating, because it's just like, get to the point of the thing. The question in I think therefore I am. you're asserting that there's a non-physical, that what, because it's a concept, it's non-physical?
All I'm saying is the I think, therefore I am. Yeah, the proof is not proving anything physical. And when we get that, therefore I am, we have something that's proven, but it's a
For
non
me,
physical thing that's proven.
interesting, because I think that cognition happens in the physical matter of the brain. I think therefore I am actually is a proof of the physical matter of the brain.
Well, then you have to presuppose that the I think requires physicalism. And that
Which,
presupposition is adding a lot to it.
well, I have no way to explain it without the supernatural. And since I don't accept the supernatural, right? Since I know
I'm,
that the
I'm, not, I'm
brain,
not insisting it's supernatural. I'm saying it's not physical. I
well, if it's
mean,
not
obviously,
measurable,
that gives a better case for the supernatural, but I mean, I'm saying that even if things are naturalistic, there's still something not physical here.
well, in what way could it be physical? We haven't been able to measure anything external.
Yeah, I mean, we can only measure. Well, I mean, my mind does measure abstracts, but measure takes on a different connotation in the abstract realm. But
Well, I mean,
if
you
we're
can
talking
count
about, but
abstract objects.
if we define measurements as physical measurements, then obviously we only measure physical things. But that's I don't think that's a tautology that evidences anything. That just
Right.
is what we label things. I don't think it provides evidence for anything further.
Yeah, I mean, I think at this point, like, I don't know that there's value in continuing, because uh, we have different assertions, and I think that they're based on I mean, effectively they're based on worldview, right? So what is more likely?
Well, to some extent, the worldview is based on this discussion. Like, I was 33 by the time I became a real Christian. So,
Sure.
yeah. So it's not like everything. I'm not trying to just presuppose my worldview and force it out there. I'm more trying to be on the I think, therefore I am, and the common ground and all that.
No, no, you clearly have a belief in the inability to explain I think therefore I am with a purely physical construct. And I have a belief that there's no problem explaining I think therefore I am with a purely physical construct. So I don't know how I don't know.
I just think if you explain it with a physical construct, then you're, um, what's that called when you make the proof of no effect by accident. So like you're accidentally sabotaging the proof there because it's not proving anything physical. Once you insist everything in there is physical, then you no longer have a proof for it.
I'm not sure I follow.
I think, therefore, I am does not prove anything physical.
Well, it doesn't prove anything at all, because I'm not proving it to
Well,
anybody else.
well, yeah, but it proves to ourselves. Like if I tell you,
Sure. Would I? I mean, the question there. If we go down the road of free will and predestination, which I it sure seems like we have free will, but I sure can't explain how it's possible that we do. Right?
well, that's explained by God.
If you accept God, then yes, you can. But it's a
But what I
paradox.
mean is that compatibilism is impossible without God, but makes perfect sense with God.
Sure,
Because
but
God is freedom. So when He creates us, like we might create a robot. If He creates us like a robot, we can still have free will. He's God. He's not a human. He doesn't have that same.
Sure. I mean, that's fine, but that still presupposes that God exists. The point I'm making, though, is that I don't believe that we have free will, and I mean, I believe that we make choices based on current state, but I don't. I think current state is predetermined, so I think what we're going to do is what we're going to do. I don't know how to reason my way out of that. Like that just seems factual to me.
Yeah, but you can say what we're going to do in freedom is what we're going to do in freedom, and that should kind of
Sure, you
clarify.
could say that. I mean, in a way, that's sort of what I'm saying, because I mean, I've argued we make choices, but the thing is, I think that our choices are based on priors, and so we cannot make any other choices. So you're on tracks They're tracks of
We,
your own
we are who
choosing.
we are. It's not because we're not free, but because we are who we are. We will only do what we will do. And
Right. But then,
people think that means a lack of freedom. No, it doesn't. It means that you are who you are.
well, but it means you couldn't do any, if you went back in time and everything was the same, you
Yeah,
couldn't
but
do
we,
it
we
different.
couldn't do anything else because we are who we are. So as we express our freedom, we can't do anything else. It
So
doesn't
how's
take
that?
our freedom away. That's an unnecessary conclusion to think
Ooh,
that our
see,
freedom's taken away.
I don't know. If I can't do anything but what I can do, then I don't think I'm actually, like, I wouldn't define
Well,
that as free will.
you're not free from being yourself. So
Sure.
that you're not free from. But if freedom from being yourself is the definition of free will, then I'm an idiot because I would never think of it that way. So yeah, I mean you're not free from being yourself, but you still have free will. That's part of who you are. God's not free from being himself. That's why God cannot tell a lie. Yet he's omnipotent.
Again, these are
Yeah, I was just trying to focus
you're
on
no,
consciousness being
but
immaterial.
sure. But I mean, I guess my point is that the if we are simply the unfolding of events, if that's what this is all just a big physics chemistry set, and it happened to, it happened that my organization of molecules at this moment saying what I'm saying is this is what it's going to be. Then I think therefore I am. It's just it's a mental pattern that's a combination of neurons and electrical firing, that holds a concept, just like the concept of the number two. It's a non-physical concept. It's just an idea. As far as like it being a proof or not a proof, I don't know, but I don't think that a proof has any special meaning among concepts. It has a special meaning for us linguistically because it's a concept that tries to do something. But I don't see it as being any different than the number two.
Okay, I mean I get what you're trying to express there because I'm a good abstract thinker.
And you're
So
very charitable. I really appreciate that. The fact that I'm trying to be charitable too. So if I'm not, let me know. But this charitable listening idea, I think, I really, I would find a discussion like that. I was going to say debate. We're not really debating. We're discussing. But I would find a discussion like this really infuriating if the person I was talking to wasn't actually trying to understand me. I was just trying to take my words apart because that would just drive me up the wall.
Yeah, I try to use semantics to listen to people rather than to have an excuse to not listen to people. To me, that's the purpose of it is to actually hear people, not to find a way to plug our ears.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate it. I know you don't agree with what I'm saying. Do you see where I'm coming from?
As far as consciousness not
yeah.
being physical, I see how you're describing its relationship to physical things, but I still do not find that to have. I still find it conclusive that consciousness is not physical, and yeah. So I don't see how you're making the connection between the things you're describing and the idea that our awareness somehow is a physical thing, or else
Sure.
because my awareness exists even if no one talks about it. It's not like we're just putting a label on an abstraction.
No, absolutely. So I think that that awareness is a thing that a computer program could have. So if a computer program can construct abstract model, well, can construct, when I say abstract model here, I don't mean an abstract model. It can construct a simulation internally, right? So if you wrote a computer program that was capable of creating its own syntax, and so it could create virtual objects, and then it could run simulations on those virtual objects. One of the virtual objects could be the program itself. And I think that sort of idea is where self-awareness comes from. And I think therefore M is just self-awareness.
Yeah, and I do follow that. That's very fascinating. The only thing is then I think we still would have a non-physical result from physical things. So we wouldn't be making a case that it's not physical, the awareness of the computer program. But I also think computers cannot have awareness in the same way. Um,
That's very humanist of you.
well, yeah, it is. I guess so. But
That
it's
was a
more
cheap shot. Sorry.
it's more theist of me because it's this whole supernatural side of things that the computer can simulate having awareness, so it can seem to, but there's nothing, like if the computer had eyes, there'd be no one behind the eyes.
So
It,
that's
and
where I disagree.
that's where I find a lot of danger is that if we're going to incorporate digitization into the mind, if the mind passes into being a simulation, we could be amongst zombies and not even know it.
Sure. I mean, but I guess that this is sort of where I disagree because if um, I don't think that it is necessarily the case that the computer is not aware, that the program is not aware. I don't think that that's a necessary truthful statement, and I base it on the fact that everything that I understand about the brain uh, tells me that it is capable of very very complex logic and is capable of doing. I mean, we have like I don't know a trillion neurons, a bunch of billion neurons. I don't know, many neurons, and 100 times that many connections between these neurons. And neurons are capable of. It was a paper I read recently that was arguing. This is maybe 4 years old now. That was arguing that the single dendrite of a single neuron likely has the computational power that they've been able to detect. So this is probably the low end of a full scale artificial neural network, right? So like the thing that we're using to do image classification and converting text to speech and all this stuff, one dendrite of one neuron has that computational power. And it's just like, well, okay, and it works in digital and analog, and it works massively parallel, right? Trillions of operations simultaneously. The idea of having a computer with that capability. So I have these really simple architectures and really slow computers. You're absolutely right. They run, for the most part, everything I run is in serial, and I'm able to get some, relatively interesting behaviors. They're quite trivial, to be honest. Having a computer with that computational power that the brain has, I don't know. I don't know what that thing could do. It's like you're used to driving around on a bicycle, and somebody gives you a Ferrari. I don't know what it could do. I don't know how fast that thing could go. So I see no reason to limit what it would be capable of. I guess is, and again, I can't prove anything. You may be absolutely right. I fully acknowledge that.
Yeah, because this isn't a refutation to your argument in any way, but from my perspective, a better simulation is not getting any closer to an actual awareness. Um, oh yeah, I'll definitely put this one on the screen. Even though I don't mind if they're less intellectually charitable, they're just being honest. It was the totally baseless insults instead of being on like honest discussion that I minded earlier. So
Yeah, and I'm totally fine. I'm just trying. I see the world from my perspective, and I try to come up with hypotheses and experiments to test my hypotheses and learn a little more. And I think like maybe from the standpoint of this discussion, maybe I err on the side of skepticism more than. So I think you can't err on the side of skepticism too much. That's just what I think. But maybe from the standpoint of your audience or you, I'm
did you
erring
say
too far.
can or excuse me? You say can or can't?
I don't think you can. I think you can't err on the side of skepticism. I think being ultimately skeptical increases the likelihood that you don't make wrong decisions, right?
Yeah, and then I agree, and that also means we define skepticism the same way. because there's a type of skepticism that's just stupid, if that makes sense.
Yeah. If you're like,
But
I don't,
yeah,
if you
we
can't prove
agree about
something,
what skepticism
yeah,
is and how valuable it is.
yeah. I'd say we should probably close it up, but there was
Yeah, that's
just
what I'm
this sort
ready to
of
do.
like just as an antidote of like the kind of discussion where people see me coming from. As they may have guessed, I am a liberal. And at one point, I went to a party, and the party wasn't very exciting. But I ran into this guy, and we had this very interesting, long conversation. And he was absolutely conservative. And basically, I was arguing for guaranteed minimum income and post scarcity and blah 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 blah. And he was arguing that in a world like that, people will just become lazy and not do things. And I was saying, no, people will flourish and they'll do art and science and it'll be great. And we went back and forth for a while, and we got into sort of the discussion of it. We would bring up different points, and where we ended, which I was actually very happy with the result, was he had a worldview that people uh, essentially are self-serving and um, wouldn't be motivated. And I'm not saying that that's the position of all conservatives. I'm just saying this particular person with whom I disagreed. And I had a position that was pretty much the opposite. And what we both agreed was that neither one of us had sufficient information to draw a conclusion as to who of us was right. And that basically what we need to do is, either go research the topic more or wait until more evidence shows up if, we're not particularly, um, uh, but the point was that we didn't just agree to disagree. We agreed that the reason that we couldn't convince the other person was because there was insufficient evidence. And I was very satisfied with that response because basically what it was amicable, right? It was like, I absolutely agree. If your view is correct, then that is the correct course of action. And I absolutely agree with you. If God is real, and then I think I have no problem with dualism, right? If there are supernatural things, I have no problem with dualism. In fact, it's a great explanation. It's a really, really good, simple explanation. It just has this one, presupposition that I've got a lot of trouble with.
Well, then I'm not amicable, and for me to even address that would be keeping you here for quite a while. So I don't know if you're going to be as happy leaving this discussion.
No,
But
no. I mean, I'm not. Yeah, I'm not. The point of that wasn't to make a point one way or the other. I could have argued the other way. I could have said I was a conservative and I was discussing with a liberal. It doesn't matter. The point was that. Um,
oh yeah,
I mean,
my point's that I'm just not gonna have the same amicable we don't have enough evidence thing. I would rather go through 12 hours of talking and prove God to you and have you be a Christian. So that's what I mean. And
sure,
I'm
sure,
not an amicable or compromising person by nature. So if I compromise or something, there's honesty there. Or I can
sure.
compromise on things in a practical way, but I'm not going to compromise on what I think is true to be nice. You know what I
Well,
mean?
I didn't. When I left that conversation, I didn't say I think you might be right. I said I think you might. I think you are probably wrong.
Yeah. When
But
I
I
say
also
I'm not
I can't.
compromising, when I say I'm
Yeah,
not
but
compromising, I'm just talking about me. I didn't mean that you guys compromised.
no, no, no.
But
What I'm saying is that at a certain point, though, I think that if we reach a point, I mean, for me, ultimately, this is all going to come down to um, for what do I have proof, and what do I have proof for, and what am I willing to accept without proof? And for me, the way that my skepticism works is I'm always going to uh, go to uh, not believing, right? So like I'm always gonna take the position if I don't know, if I don't have sufficient proof. So
okay, that's really
I seem to have
interesting. Because then
hit a
I have to
chord
think,
on
what
the
does I don't know
discussion.
mean? You know?
I don't know means I don't have sufficient information to formulate an answer.
Well, yeah, but my perspective on like because we have talked about some things, and it's is I don't know special pleading in a certain direction or the other direction. I just mean I have to think about it some. So now that
Sure,
I've
sure.
listened, it would take some thought to like get some progress on. But
I, I,
yeah,
I hopefully I am coming across as a reasonable person, and if so, then if you are able to make a solid argument, I should be convinced. The
yeah, you
fact that
definitely come across as a reasonable person. Yeah,
right,
and
the fact that I can't make an argument that can convince you gives me cause to worry that I am not right.
hmm.
Right. So like that's the thing. If this was a slam dunk, then I should just be able to go, you know, no net. I mean, it's all net and done. Right. And the same thing for you. The fact that we can't, that's why this is worth talking about. That's why it's
Yeah, I
interesting.
mean, I do feel I could slam dunk, but it's like
Well, you only slam dunk
I'm
if you
kind of a
convince.
brute when it comes to debating and stuff. Like if I'm debating to do my best to prove, then that doesn't leave like time and space for a full discussion like this.
No, that's fine. But the point would still be that if we had a debate, and even if your audience was convinced, right? Even if you use the language and your presence, right? You maybe get me to lose temper or whatever, right? And so like you've convinced your audience that you've won. You get the point on the scorecard. If you haven't convinced me, then you haven't actually won that debate, right? If I haven't convinced you, I haven't won that debate. And so to me, if I'm incapable of convincing someone, then I worry that my position is not defensible.
Oh yeah, and we don't worry as much about that because of Romans 1, which addresses I'm not going to try to like bring that up per se, but you know, it addresses a lot of what we talked about and summarizes the Christian side of that. Like the creation makes God obvious, and people are suppressing truth, and it's
Yeah,
the
but I'm not
suppressing
convinced
truth
by that
part that
argument.
speaks to this.
Right?
Yeah,
I wish I was convinced by that
but then
argument.
if the people who aren't convinced are suppressing truth, then it's not an
That's
evidence against truth that they're not
but
convinced.
that's an assertion though. You'd have to actually be able
Yeah,
to.
yeah. I'm just voicing our perspective on
Well,
the
I
same thing.
totally agree. I guess I'm just saying that I mean, this is super interesting because this is sort of at the core of the stuff that's interesting to me is, um, what exactly is what is assertion and what is, uh, what is being made as assertion and what's so you're asserting that God exists, and then when I deny it, you're asserting that by denying it, I am fulfilling something in Scripture. And again, but that's just to me that's just an assertion. So it's like this is sort of again, this sort of goes to the point that if I was in your shoes right now, I would say, man, how do I phrase this in a way that convinces you? Right? Like that's what I would want to do because for me, I guess I'll leave it. I'll say one more thing, and then I swear I'll shut up. I have described my view of sort of uh, how I approach understanding stuff, or the way my brain works. Let's put it that way. Not how I understand stuff. It's not my epistemology. It's how my brain works. There's a big spreadsheet. And the spreadsheet has, for every sort of fact, for everything I could possibly know, it's either red or green. And if it's green, I've got something in there that I feel pretty good about. And certain of these things are axioms, and certain ones are things that follow from some axiom. Sometimes when I talk to someone, though, they say something, and that thing does not jive with something in my table. So sometimes it's like, oh, Bob was at the pizza place yesterday, and I'm like, really, he was? I don't think he was at the pizza place. And I talked to somebody else, and they're like, oh yeah, Bob was totally there. And I'm like, okay, I changed the truth value in that thing, and it was green before that Bob wasn't there. I change it goes to red because now I'm unsure. I confirm it, and it goes back to, I may change the truth value, and it goes back to green. Right. And so like there are certain things like where did the universe come from? That thing is perpetually, I don't know. It's gray, but I'm kind of okay with it being gray. I've become okay with it because nobody knows as far as I know, right? Like as far as I know, there just isn't a good answer to that one. But when I am talking to somebody and they disagree with me on something, it turns the box red, and I really, really want it to go green. And I don't care if to get it green, that means I convince them, which then confirms for me that my argument holds water, or they convince me and I change the truth value. right? So the truth value isn't the red or green. The truth value is the red or green is my confidence in the truth value. And if someone really changes an axiom, well, then, oh crap, the whole table's going to turn red, and I'm going to have to sit down and think for a long time and work everything out, right? So, like, but luckily, I have never had an axiom overturned.
Okay, and then I think this comment was, judging from the other comments around it, it was around the time of you saying that the I don't know conclusions, rather than making assumptions, you'll admit to not knowing things. I think that might be what Outcast said. He loved what you just said. But regardless, and there was a comment about you being more honest than most people. They specified atheists, but personally, I would generalize that to most people. And as soon as you mentioned that you put faith in not being like a brain in a vat, and of course, in the context that you used it, but you weren't afraid to use the word faith. And then when you say you have concerns about religious faith and just the honesty about the use of the words and stuff, I knew right then like you were going to be a big hit with the audience.
Oh, well, okay, good, good, good. Yeah, no, we can do this again. I don't know that it'll ever go anywhere, but it's certainly interesting. And
Yeah, we got to do it again. We have the most people we've had watching so far, 11 people now, and so
and it seems like there's a variety of
yeah,
opinions.
if
So
we went for another hour, we'd probably have 13 watching. So we got
oh
to do this again. There's people who want to see it.
all right, super. Yeah, we can chat over email and figure it out. Probably, give it a week or whenever. Whenever you want to do this. But
Yeah, probably at least a week. I'm always like juggling with a bunch of different people. I'm just kind of in the storm of it.
super. Yeah, this has been interesting. Again, I think you're totally wrong, and it's super interesting being able to talk to you about this stuff and having a platform. If there are questions about the sort of evolutionary processes, particularly the digital stuff, I will talk about that for hours and days. So
Yeah, that's I'd like our next talk to be more deeply into that, and we might not even get to um morality then.
right,
Those
that's fine.
that because that can become a pretty a very controversial topic. Like the talk I had
Yes.
with Luca, the point of objective morality was really what I kept pressing him on. But my intentions were different with him. Like I said, his question was like, "Well, how do you know God exists?" I was like, "Let's talk about it sometime." So here, where it says "good talking," or the talk with him, I had it say, "Does Nicholas know God? Do I know God?" But good talking is the generic one I'm going to go with. So I really appreciate this, Cliff. This has been a wonderful discussion. I think we've only gotten um, kind of a very basic summary of like some of the fascinating insights as far as software evolution, how that implies to insights into the mind and stuff. And I didn't even talk about how Darwinian evolution influenced my thinking and how I perceive politics and the changes in the world and all that. And when you say that religion comes about in a similar way, I would categorize religion with all politics in that personally. So I'm excited for us to next time go into that fascinating talk.
Great. Yeah, super. My work at home lifestyle provides me a lot of freedom in my schedule. So I'm working on a few research projects at the same time, but I only have a handful of meetings. So um, yeah, it would be pretty much what I'm saying is available whenever is fine. So cool. I don't know how you sign off here, but
Yeah. If you just want to say your goodbye to my people, then I'll kick you out and I'll say my goodbye to my people. Let me just click one thing first.
all right. So
There.
yeah, thanks everyone for coming and listening to me effectively going about my research. It's very rare that I have an audience who's willing to shut up and listen to me. So this has been very fun.
And there's actually other people in my community you might have really fun discussions with, but they'd be more like debates, more
Sure.
on that topic, maybe. But since you're in a different side of evolution, you might not want to do that. But
I mean, I could debate. I think that the thing is that they may not find it satisfying because I'm just going to keep saying I don't know. Right?
yeah,
So
rather
nobody
than a
gets through it.
debate, actually, I guess what I'm getting at is less about what I want to say to you and more about what I want to say to the whole community of mine. That like, if I go Tangelo's channel or SFT or LPP, one of them who is like what you have to say about evolution. A lot of people would find that interesting. So even though you're an opposing viewpoint, if they gave you a chance to, you'd have a
Mhm,
larger audience
mhm,
than you do with me. So I would
sure.
like you to have a chance to like share more with more of our community. Is actually more what I'm getting at,
Oh,
or
sure.
what I
That'd be
wanted to get at. So
cool.
perfect. Thank you, Cliff.
All right. Have a good one.
So now it's just me. Okay. So I wish you all shalom. That's the one true peace that only Messiah can give. So those of you who do not yet have your trust in Messiah, I pray that you will have your trust in Messiah. And then, of course, my three favorite words of advice for you all: just trust Messiah.